Sangye chodang soki chognam la, jangchu bardo dagni kyap suchi, daki jinyen gibe sonam ki, drola penchir sangye druparsho. Well, welcome everybody. You probably need to turn your speaker off. Do you want to come down? Because we're getting like a echo and a recording going on. Hold on just a second. Technical difficulties.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi,
Hello, everyone. I'm incognito today. I'm good. I'm good.
Good. It's good to see your name on the screen. I know you're there.
Glad to be able to participate.
Yeah, I'm just happy that you all are here. That's wonderful. So we're going to open with a sort of a visualization type of guided visualization meditation to sort of shape our mind in the right virtuous direction and intention for the main portion of this session, which is from His Holiness's book, Beyond Religion. And to sort of give a context for this, I think we need some clarifications of terms. So first of all, what is a Buddha? What is a Buddha? A Buddha is not a creator God. It is not a substitute for a creator God. A Buddha is a consciousness that has removed all of its afflictive emotions, destructive emotions, all of its ignorance, all of its misconceptions, and developed all of their good qualities, loving kindness, compassion, and wisdom, all the good qualities to their ultimate point. So in other words, a Buddhahood or enlightenment represents the evolutionary fulfillment of what consciousness can attain. And this is what we actually all can attain. So we shouldn't think of the Buddha as being something that we cannot become ourselves. The Buddha has been through the whole process, knows exactly the pathway and how to lead us on these pathways of consciousness that will lead us to enlightenment, and is sort of like our spiritual guide. And in relation to that, I would say that the concept of a guru is like a emissary, or even in some cases an emanation of a Buddha, because we are so contaminated right now, our consciousnesses. We are not able to see a Buddha directly. So Shakyamuni Buddha, back when he was on the planet, he said in the future he would come through various gurus and help sentient beings who are on the path to enlightenment. So when we think of gurus, we want to always think of the gurus as being connected with the Buddhas, and the gurus are the emissaries of the Buddhas that help us. Now I want to talk about sentient beings. What is a sentient being? A sentient being is a consciousness, a being that has a consciousness, like we are sentient beings. Sentient beings have a sort of a baseline, non-conceptual consciousness, just a pure awareness and a clarity that's non-conceptual. It's sort of primordial. We're really not aware of it, but it is exactly the same consciousness that a Buddha has, primordial consciousness, non-conceptual consciousness. It's the same consciousness a Buddha had when a Buddha was a sentient being. So at that baseline level, we have the capacity as sentient beings to become Buddhas. What the problem with sentient beings is, and it's really no fault of our own, because remember, this is an evolutionary process. Sentient beings have become, out of ignorance, we have active misconceptions about the nature of the self and the nature of all phenomena. In other words, we have active misconceptions based on our ignorance about the nature of reality. And what has happened to us is that we, through that ignorance and through that misconception, we see that the self exists independently and separately from other selves. And when I'm talking about the self, I'm talking about just a sense of me, a sense of I, me, I, that we think is me and I. I mean, it's separate from everybody else. The other thing that a sentient being does out of ignorance and active misconceptions, that they think all phenomena also exist independently and separately. So in other words, my body, my mind, those are phenomena. That's not the self. When we're talking about the self, we're just talking about me, me, me. But my body, my mind, my house, my car, my friend, my wife, my mother, we see these all as separate kinds of independent phenomena. Due to that, we have a sense of neediness and lack. And this creates desire in a sentient being, a desire that a sentient being needs something, because we feel like we're independent and separate from everything. So we need something. So that creates the desire. When the desire is blocked, when a sentient being can't get what it thinks it needs, what it thinks it wants, then afflictive emotions arise: anger, dissatisfaction, jealousy, depression. All of these things come about as a result of the misconception of the self and all phenomena. So sentient beings, since beginningless time, because consciousness itself, baseline consciousness, which is not physical, is beginningless and endless. We're never going to find a beginning to consciousness, and we'll never find an end to consciousness. So according to Buddhist philosophy, a sentient being cycles through lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. We keep making this same mistake, of the misconception of the self, of phenomena, that everything exists independently, including me and everything else, which causes this desire, this neediness. When it's not met, we have these afflictive emotions. And with these afflictive emotions, such as anger, strong attachment, grasping, greed, lust, craving, jealousy, envy, all of these, through those emotions, we generate negative actions of body, speech, and mind. We kind of lash out. And these negative actions then create negative results for us, negative karma. The result of these negative actions continues us in this cycle over and over and over again, until through the evolutionary process, we've had enough suffering, enough experience with this, that at some level, we've kind of had it. And we figured there must be a better way. And we begin going about searching in ways to find a better way. Sometimes it will be through religion, it will be through science, psychology, whatever it is. We're looking for ways to solve what this problem is. The Buddha, over 2,500 years ago, realized this, and he solved this problem. He had a realization of the nature of reality and what the self is and what phenomena is. And so he had made a commitment to help all sentient beings achieve the pathway of consciousness that he achieved. So that is the difference between a Buddha and sentient beings. There's another thing I want to talk about in relation to this, the breathing exercises in this meditation. According to Tibetan, even Hindu, Hindu and Tibetan and Eastern philosophy, Chinese, that our consciousness is a kind of very, very subtle energy. Sometimes it's called, in Tibetan, it's called lung, which means wind. But it's not air. It's not like, it's related to air, but it's not air. It's a kind of very subtle energy. In Tibetan, it's called lung. In Sanskrit, it's called prana. In Chinese, they'll call it qi. It is this energy that, and I'll also explain to it how it comes. The consciousness comes into the body and resides in the body. And there's a energy that comes in, and it follows this pathway. It comes in through the nostrils. It goes up two sides, up to the crown, very crown. And then there is a big central channel. This is like an invisible tube that this energy runs through. And there are two side channels on either side. They're right, the central channel is right in front of the spine, and the side channels are on either side of the central channel. The energy comes in through the side channels, goes in through the central channel. And then from those three main channels, there are many, 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 many channels of energy that go throughout the entire body, from the tip of the fingers to the tips of your toes, to the tip of your head, ears, everything. Even outside the body, this energy goes a little bit. When you look at the Tibetan drawings, the medical drawings of this, it would remind you of the nervous system, the way the nervous system runs throughout the entire body. And it is closely connected with the nervous system, but it is not physical. It's an energetic thing. So when this energy is kind of blocked due to our afflictive states of mind, then that can cause problems in the flow of energy in our body. It can cause problems with our psychology. It can cause problems with our physical health. So what we want to do is the whole system of Tibetan medicine works with these energies to correct them. Same with Qigong, works with correcting these energies, sustaining them and balancing them. And this is what we're talking about when we do a breathing exercise in this meditation. We're working with that energy. So I just want to practice this for a little bit. So just imagine that you breathe in air through one nostril, let's say the right nostril. And imagine that air is going up through the nostril to the crown of the head, and then down the right side of the central channel, okay, as you're breathing in. As you breathe out, imagine that air, or that energy, that wind energy, goes up the left side channel, on the left side of the central channel, comes all the way up, goes to the crown of your head, comes back down and out through the left nostril. Just practice that a few times. Now reverse the direction of that. So you're bringing the air in through the wind energy in through the left nostril, up to the crown, down the left side of the central channel, all the way to the base of your spine. Make a U-turn up to the right side of the central channel, up through the crown and back out through the right nostril. Practice that a couple of times. So the in-breath brings it all the way down to the base of the spine, and the out-breath brings it from the base of the spine back up and out. Now this is a third way of doing this. Now breathe through, imagine that you're breathing through this wind energy through both nostrils, goes up, both of them go up to the crown of the head, come down on either side of this central channel, come down to the base of the spine, and then they join together and they go up through the central channel, up through the central channel, all the way up, straight through and out the crown of your head. Okay? And do that a couple of times. 3 times. We're just getting used to it. Yeah, 3 times. Yeah, you can do 3 times. Okay, now we can actually begin the opening guided visualization meditation. So just breathe regularly through your nostrils in and out. It might be helpful to have your eyes closed for this, since there'll be so much imagining of visual things. Imagine in the space in front of you, clear, radiant light, radiating out in all directions. Think of this clear light as the consciousness, the mind of an enlightened being who is reaching out to you as you breathe in the energy of this enlightened being. As you breathe out, feel that you are connecting with this enlightened consciousness. Now imagine that you bring in the energy of this enlightened consciousness in through your right nostril, up to the crown of your head, down the side of your central channel, makes a U-turn, comes back out, up to the crown of your head, out through the left nostril. As you breathe in this energy of enlightened consciousness, taking it down to the base of your spine, imagine that as you're breathing out, you're releasing all of your destructive anger, hatred, and fear. And that comes out through your left nostril in the form of like liquid black smoke, which completely dissipates and dissolves into the mind of enlightenment. Do that 3 times. Now reverse the direction, breathing in the energy, taking in the energy of the enlightened being through your left nostril. As you bring it down and up the right side, imagine that you're releasing through your right nostril all of your destructive craving, grasping attachment, lust, greed, this sense of, sense of attachment. Release that all in the form of liquid black smoke that dissolves into the mind of enlightenment. Do that 3 times. Now breathe in this energy of the enlightened consciousness into your being through both nostrils, down either side of the central channel. They join together at the base of your spine, coming up through the central channel, out the crown of your head. And as you're doing this, as it's coming up and out the crown of your head, imagine that you're releasing all of your ignorance, your misconceptions about the nature of reality, your confusion. And that also releases out through the crown of your head in the form of a liquidy black smoke, which completely dissolves and dissipates into the light of the enlightened consciousness. Do that 3 times. Now just breathe out regularly in and out through your nose. And imagine that you're breathing in clear energy and you're breathing out clear, clean energy. As you now focus on this clear, radiant light emanating in front of you, begin to see colors forming as if colors, as light going through a prism, and that light separates out into these 5 stainless colors. This would be blue, white, red, yellow, and green. These are stainless, they are transparent. It's like rainbow colors, pure energy. These colors then form into the shape of the Buddha. Seated on a lotus on top of a sun disk and a moon disk, a red sun disk and a white moon disk. These are all made of light. The Buddha has golden skin, indigo colored hair, saffron robe, red lips, extremely peaceful expression. Buddha is emanating loving kindness, great compassion, and profound wisdom. And this is emanating in all directions out from the Buddha. Now notice in front of you, behind you, to your left and to your right, are countless other sentient beings. Imagine that all of these sentient beings are in human form with a human consciousness and mind that can comprehend the Buddha's teachings and can actually put them into practice. This group of sentient beings includes your parents from this life. It includes those people who you are comfortable with, who you are close to, friends, relatives, who you feel connected with in some way. It also includes sentient beings who you do not feel connected with, who elicit aversion in you, who you would think of as enemies. And then the vast majority of these sentient beings are complete strangers to you. All of these sentient beings are looking to the Buddha for a safe direction to take in their life. All of these sentient beings, just like you, have been born, have experienced desire, a craving for happiness, have achieved only fleeting happiness, disappointment, dissatisfaction, aging, sickness, suffering, and death. No matter whether they're your friends, they're your enemies, or your strangers, all sentient beings have this same thing in common. We all have this ego grasping, which is a misconception of the self. And we all have a misconception of phenomena out there as existing as independently and separately. This causes all of our problems. And so all these sentient beings are looking to the Buddha for guidance. So the Buddha is like if you were trying to travel a path that was unknown to you. If you had somebody who had traveled that path before as your guide, you could be sure that you would arrive at your destination safely and securely. And this is what the Buddha represents to all sentient beings: a safe guide, a sure guide that can take us on the pathway that will lead us to complete happiness, liberation, and enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so all sentient beings together, we will say this chant that is a refuge prayer, but really refuge, if a better translation, I think, is safe direction, because it means that you are actually taking this direction. The Buddha is not doing it for you, but the Buddha is giving you a safe direction to follow. He's your guide. So there's a Pali chant that's Buddham Saranam Gacchami. And Buddham, of course, means Buddha, the enlightened beings. Saranam means safe direction or refuge. And Gacchami means I take. So imagine that you and all sentient beings are chanting this prayer. So you can repeat after me. Buddham Saranam Gacchami. We'll do this 2 more times. As we're doing this, imagine that radiant nectar is coming from the Buddha, entering the bodies of you and all sentient beings, and completely removing all obstacles that we have to following the safe direction and guidance of an enlightened being, of our spiritual teachers. Buddham Saranam Gacchami. Buddham Saranam Gacchami. Now imagine coming from the Buddha a kind of vibration or a resonance that is very, very healing. And you feel this resonance come into your body as this healing energy, removing all the obstacles that you would have to following the pathways of consciousness that will lead you to enlightenment itself. This is the Dharma. These are the words of the Buddha, the teachings that he has given energetically that allow us to follow these pathways of consciousness ourselves. This is the actual refuge. We walk the path. The Buddha leads us, but we walk the path. So imagine this resonance coming towards you from the Buddha in the form of radiant nectar that fills your entire being and removes all obstacles to you being able to successfully traverse these pathways of consciousness that will lead you to enlightenment. And the word for Dharma in Pali is Dhammam. So we'll repeat this as we imagine this resonance coming into our body. Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. And feel that the obstacles to your following these pathways of consciousness have been removed. Now, as you look at the Buddha radiating light, on these beams of light that are coming out from the Buddha are other beings of light, smaller beings of light. Some of these are highly realized practitioners on the path to enlightenment. We would call these arhats. These are beings who have had a direct, non-conceptual experience of the nature of reality, but have not yet reached ultimate Buddhahood. These beings that are coming on these pathways toward you go all the way down from that level. They come down to the Buddhas and monks who live among us that we know and we see and we teach us. It also, on these pathways of light are also beings, friends with us who are on this path with us. This is called the Sangha. These are beings that help us, that travel on the pathway with us and support us, lift us up, hold our hand, walk with us on the path. So as we say this next chant in Pali, which is Sangham Saramam Gacchami, we imagine that all the obstacles we have to receiving the help from this Sangha are removed. Sangham Saranam Gacchami. Sangham Saranam Gacchami. Sangham Saranam gacchami. And finally, imagine that you yourself think these thoughts. I now want to engage in this path to enlightenment. I see that there is no point in continuing with this grasping, craving ego that is mistakenly viewing reality and causing all this suffering, not only for myself, but for others. And so I make a commitment now to follow the Buddha's guidance, to step onto the path, follow these pathways of consciousness that are going to lead to enlightenment, and walk with my friends, the Sangha, on this path. With this thought, the Buddha is extremely pleased and sends a duplicate of himself from his heart, which comes to you and alights on the crown of your head. It then merges into you, into your body, transforming your body into a being of light and into the potential Buddha that you can become. When this has happened, you begin to emanate light out in all directions. At first, this light contacts people, other sentient beings with whom you have a connection. Either you know them or you have a karmic connection with them. And that light emanating from you then triggers them to achieve their own Buddhahood, so that you see them become bodies of light. They in turn pass this on to other beings that they know and they have karmic connections. So there is this chain reaction of enlightenment among all sentient beings, from one to another, to another, to another, to another. So bring yourself up like 40,000 feet and look down on this scene of all these sentient beings, one by one by one by one, and then exponentially, all sentient beings becoming enlightened, becoming completely free from all suffering, from all afflictive emotions, from all ignorance, completely liberated, completely happy, completely enlightened. You realize that this is simply your vision. But as you look down on this, you say, wouldn't it be wonderful if this could occur? And you think these thoughts. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings be liberated with the joy that knows no suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion that holds some close and others distant. May I be blessed by my gurus and all the enlightened beings to have the power to accomplish this. And bring yourself back down to where you were seated among all these sentient beings who are now enlightened beings in your vision. You're in front of the Buddha. And imagine that the Buddha draws this vision of yours, all of these enlightened beings, into the Buddha's heart. And then the Buddha, again, sends out a duplicate of himself with your vision of these enlightened beings in his heart, comes to the crown of your head, goes down your central channel all the way to your heart, where there is an open lotus. The Buddha sits in that open lotus, and the lotus closes up and holds the Buddha and your vision of enlightened beings in your heart. So that's the end of that meditation, and that is a one of the Buddha's preliminary practices. And some of these other sessions will do other preliminary practices that are suggested to do anytime we would go into any kind of teaching or meditation session. And these preliminary practices were taught to Kavita and I by Geshe Drakpa, and he was very much in agreement with doing what is necessary culturally to make this meaningful for you. If you were to do these preliminary practices in a traditional Tibetan Buddhist way, which was working for a medieval kind of culture with all these different kinds of cultural influences, it would be very confusing, and it has been confusing when people have tried this from another culture. But what I've done in this visualization was to sort of get rid of all of that cultural uh, confusion and just go to the basic point of what was being talked about. And Geshe Drakpa, from the very beginning when he taught us, said, you can do that. Do whatever was going to work for you, but make sure you stick with the basic steps of what this is, because it's very important to shape your mind. So now we will go into, back in 2012, Geshe Drakpa brought this book to us. He handed it to me, and it's called Beyond Religion. And I immediately had the impression from him that he was saying this is going to be a really, really good teaching for Westerners. And Geshe Drakpa himself had said to me one time, you will teach, almost like I couldn't tell if it was an order or a prediction or what. But he said that, and it was very unusual. I was just driving in the car, and he just pointed at me and said that to me. And when he handed me this book, I had that impression from him that he felt that I could take this book and share it with others. So this book actually is the basis of compassion integrity training, which our center has been sponsoring this compassion and integrity training that has been going on as Zoom meetings. It's something that you pay. Well, the city does this. Yeah, the city does this. But we've been sponsoring it and having a group here through Zoom doing that, and that, which is very, very, very good. What I'm focusing on here is the second half of the Dalai Lama's book, which is the how-to. And when he talks about the second half, the first half of the book is he really focuses on a secular approach to ethics, a secular approach to ethics, which is extremely helpful because not everybody is going to be religious or want to follow Buddhism. He understands that. This is why he's such a terrific, terrific teacher. The second half of the book, he relies on his Tibetan training, and there are exercises in this book and how-tos in this book, in the second half of the book, which is what I want to go through here with this group. So the first thing I want to start with is emotions. And His Holiness says,
Christopher, would you just mention that we're recording these and there'll be a YouTube playlist so that if people have to miss a session, going through this and want to go back and check.
Okay. Did you all hear that? This is being recorded. It will be on YouTube.
There's going to be a playlist.
And a playlist.
We'll include the playlist link.
And the link will be sent.
With the emails.
With the emails. Okay. Okay.
So at any point you can dip into any of this.
Okay. So one of the first things that the Dalai Lama talks about, is it possible for self-improvement? And he says, yes, it is, because the nature of consciousness is that it can change. Everything can change. The consciousness has the ability to make these changes. The problem that we have is that we have become so habitually oriented to a certain way of being and thinking that it's like we're in a rut and it's hard for us to get out of. And the only way to change that and turn it around is to create new habits. And what he said, even for a materialist, this is now, neuroscience has now found that the brain itself can change if your thoughts change. And if they change consistently enough, these pathways to the brain, and actually the sections of the brain themselves, will alter and will change. So he points out that even for materialists, the possibility of change is definitely there. He then goes into talking about the world of our emotions. And he says, in the classical Buddhist science of mind in which I'm trained, there is no concept of emotion as a single category that precisely corresponds to the understanding of emotion in contemporary Western psychology. Indeed, there is no word in either Sanskrit or classical Tibetan that exactly translates in Sanskrit to the word emotion. Instead, all mental states are understood to include both cognitive and feeling dimensions to some degree, and to contain 5 omnipresent mental factors, of which feeling is one. he doesn't go to explain this any further. So I feel like it's really important to explain what's being talked about here. Buddhism is like a science of the mind. And this is all coming directly from the Buddha, down through the teachings, down through the lineage, through all the teachers that they have. It's very important that they keep this lineage. So there are, in Buddhism, there is according to Buddhism, there is a sort of a fundamental primordial consciousness. It is non-conceptual. It is clear. It is aware. It has it's aware and it knows. Basically, it's clear. That usually we are not even aware of that. In esoteric Buddhism practices, it's often referred to as the clear light mind. Then what we have are what are called main minds. And this seems very confusing to us because there are 6 main minds. 5 of them correspond to our 5 senses, and 1 of them corresponds to our mental sense. So we normally think of these 5 senses as physical, which indeed they are. There's a physical eye, there's a physical nose, ear, tongue, tactile sensation, and a physical brain that we call the mind. Buddhism's not talking about that. Buddhism is talking about the awareness of what the eye sees. That's an eye consciousness. The awareness of what the ear hears. That's ear consciousness. And consciousness and mind are the same thing in Buddhism. There's an awareness of what the nose smells. That's a consciousness. There's an awareness of tactile sensations. That's a consciousness. And then there's awareness of what the mind, the cognitive mind, the conceptual mind is doing. Mental processes, that's an awareness. So what we have is, aside from our senses, there's an eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, tactile consciousness, and mental consciousness. These are the main minds. These are the main minds. The way I think Geshe Drakpa described it this way, as well as I've read that one of these teachers that we've studied, Tashi Tsering in England, he described it this way. You think of the main minds as a cinema screen. There's a cinema screen. And then there are these mental factors. The mental factors are all the shapes and colors and things and sounds and everything that are projected onto that screen. And what we normally pay attention to, what we're caught up in, is the shapes, the sounds, the color. Think about when you're watching a movie. You're not really aware of the screen, but you're certainly aware of everything that's going on. And it brings out emotions in you, and you get involved in it and wrapped up in it. And that's what the mental factors are. And what the Dalai Lama said here, with each of these main minds, these 6 main minds, there are 5 omnipresent mental factors. There are many, many, many mental factors. I think there's a list like a 51 or more, but there are 5 that are omnipresent with every one of these main minds.
You're going 5.
There are 6 main minds. There are 5 omnipresent mental factors. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. So used to doing this. All right. So the best way to do this is just do it and describe it. So, I'll list what they are. They are volition, contact, attention. These are the omnipresent mental factors: volition, contact, attention, discernment, and feeling. Okay. This is where the emotional part comes in. So we'll just, as a practice, hold your hand out in front of you and look at your hand. What just happened was the mental factor of volition. Your mind moved. It had an intention to look at your hand. That is volition. The second one, upon seeing your hand, your eye consciousness made contact with the object, which is your hand. And that object is reflected back to your eye consciousness, your eye sense, and your consciousness is aware of that. That is called contact. You've contacted the object. Now I'm telling you to continue to look at that hand. That's called the mental factor of attention, for you to be able to hold your attention onto that object. Okay. Then the next mental factor is discernment. And what I'm going to tell you is look at the characteristics of your hand. So you may look at your hand and you may go, oh, this is a very nice, long fingers and they're smooth and the skin is all smooth and the nails are really nice. And I like that. I may look at my hand and what I see is I go, these are kind of stubby fingers. The knuckles are kind of like all wrinkled. There's a lot of veins and stuff sticking out. And there's a lot of these freckles and age spots. And, well, actually, I kind of like it. But I mean, somebody else might go, whoa, like for instance, Tracy. I know Tracy has beautiful hands. If Tracy has beautiful hands, if Tracy looked at her hand and saw my hand, she'd go, I got to fix that immediately. Or vice versa. If I looked at my hand and I saw these beautiful long fingers and shiny nails and smooth skin, I'd go, whoa, that's feeling. That's feeling. From this discernment, there's a feeling that arises that you are attracted to it, or you're averted to it, or there's a neutral sensation. You may look at your hand and just go, it's a hand. Either way, it doesn't matter to me. But that's the feeling. That's where the emotion comes in. It is a process that happens in a split second with everything. Everything. There is this volition. Our mind is drawn to something. There is a contact. We make a contact. Either it's a sound, a smell, a taste, a touch, whatever. We contact it. We hold on to it with an attention. Then we discern it. We discern the characteristics of it. And based on our habitual propensities and the context for us, we have a feeling that arises. So the Dalai Lama says a simple process of even counting 1 to 10 has some kind of feeling tone to it. And of course, it's entirely based on context, I mean, I could count 1 to 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I would think back when I learned my numbers, I think back about when I was in elementary school, and I would have a feeling about that, which actually is kind of positive. I have a positive feeling. It's not like a huge positive feeling, but there is something with everything we do, every contact we make, there is some kind of feeling. And this is where our emotions arise, according to Buddhism. If you look at a traditional Western definition of emotion, it doesn't talk about all those stages. It doesn't get into that amount of specificity. And so we wind up just thinking that it's a feeling. It's just a feeling. It's different than it's not in my head. It's not my mind. My mind has nothing to do with it. It's just an emotion, a feeling. And that's, according to Buddhism, that's not really how it works. That's not how it works. It's very connected to the mind itself. So there are various ways of categorizing our emotional states. For example, in contemporary psychology, the main distinction is often drawn between emotional states which on the one hand are pleasurable or joyful and are described as positive, and those which on the other hand are unpleasant or painful and described as negative. In classical Buddhist psychology, however, the distinction is rather different. Instead, the primary distinction is not between those states which are pleasurable and those that are painful, but between those that are beneficial and those that are harmful. Afflictive mental states, known as nyongmong in Tibetan or klesha in Sanskrit, are those which undermine our long-term well-being, while non-afflictive mental states are those which have no such destructive impact. Given these different ways of categorizing emotional experience, it is important for readers not to confuse those emotions which are afflictive, that is to say, harmful to our long-term well-being, with those which simply don't feel good. Of course, sometimes these overlap. Feelings of hatred, for example, are both destructive and unpleasant to experience, but there can also be experiences which may not be pleasant, but can nevertheless be beneficial. And in the same way, there can be feelings that are pleasant, which nevertheless can be destructive. For instance, feelings of sadness, grief, and remorse are certainly not pleasurable, but they need not in themselves be afflictive. When faced, say, with the death of a loved one, feelings of grief and sorrow may actually be quite constructive in helping us come to terms with our loss and move on with our lives. In the same way, emotions which may initially seem pleasurable can nevertheless be destructive at a deeper level by undermining our mental peace and stability. One example might be lust or excessive longing for a particular object. Such longing may in some sense seem pleasurable, But eventually, obsessive craving will erode our capacity for genuine contentment and undermine our mental equilibrium, and should therefore be considered destructive. In the context of secular ethics, this distinction between those mental states which undermine well being, our own and that of others, and those which promote survival and well being can be very useful, since it's directly relevant to our pursuit of happiness and an ethically sound way of life. Given that people come from many different backgrounds and cultures, which states are to be considered destructive and which are to be considered beneficial may vary in particular cases. Generally speaking, we can define destructive emotions as those states which undermine our well-being by creating inner turmoil, thereby undermining self-control and depriving us of mental freedom. Within this, it is also possible to distinguish between two subcategories: those emotional states that are destructive in themselves, such as greed, hatred, or malice, and those states such as attachment, anger, or fear, which only become destructive when their intensity is disproportionate to the situation in which they arise. From a biological perspective, all our basic emotions evidently have evolutionary purposes. For example, attachment helps bring us together and enables us to create bonds. Anger helps us repel forces that are detrimental to our survival and well-being. Fear enables us to respond to a threat with vigilance, and envy prompts us to compete with others so that we do not overlook our own needs. Scientists have demonstrated that these basic emotions have clear biological dimensions. When we face an immediate danger, for example, and fear arises, extra blood rushes to our legs. And with increased adrenaline and our hearts beating faster, the emotion of fear literally prepares us to flee. In contrast, when anger arises, more blood goes to our arms, preparing us to confront the threat. So the important point to bear in mind is that these feelings are not destructive in themselves. They become destructive only when their intensity is out of proportion to the situation, or when they arise in situations that do not call for them. As for attachment, which after all is the feeling that holds families and communities together, we don't usually think of it as destructive. However, when this basic emotion becomes excessive and wants to control its object, it does become destructive. This is true also of desire. In itself, desire is not destructive. After all, without desire, the human race would cease to exist altogether. In fact, desire is the emotion that drives many of our day-to-day activities, from getting up in the morning to eating, working, pursuing our immediate and long-term goals in life. Similarly, even anger is not always destructive. For example, in some situations, strong compassion may give rise to an equally strong sense of outrage, that is, anger, about an injustice. Again, feeling angry can, in the short term, make our minds more focused and give us an extra burst of energy and determination. In these ways, anger can, in certain situations, make us more effective in getting things done and in obtaining what we rightly seek. However, when anger extends beyond this practical function, most of the energy it brings us is not helpful at all. Since all of us have probably at one time or another been on the receiving end of other people's anger, we all have experience of its unpleasant consequences. However, while anger may sometimes have a constructive element, hatred never does. Hatred is always destructive. Like anger, fear is not destructive in every situation. Fear makes us more attentive and guards us against danger. It is also a powerful motivating factor, forcing us to be cautious and to take care of our well-being. But when fear is obsessive, it can paralyze us and become a very destructive mental condition. Furthermore, excessive fear gives rise to a persistent state of anxiety, which is harmful to our health. I therefore often distinguish between reasonable fear and unreasonable fear. The first kind is not only legitimate, but actually necessary to our survival. If a mad dog comes running at us, we need to respond to this danger with fear. This is obvious. In contrast, unreasonable fear occurs when the source of threat is largely our own mental projection. We need to keep this kind of fear in check, for it is totally useless and often destructive. What we need to counter unreasonable fear is a better understanding of the situation at hand. This dual aspect of emotions, that all of them have destructive and non-destructive sides, can also be seen in other mental states such as doubt, shame, grief, competitiveness, and even our sense of ego itself. Doubt is a mental factor that enables us to inquire and seek out understanding. Indeed, I always say that a dose of skepticism is quite healthy and that it opens our minds to questioning and new knowledge. However, when doubt becomes pathological, it can paralyze us and prevent us from taking any decisive action. The same is true of shame. At the basic level, shame is an important social emotion, which has a constructive function. Nevertheless, when shame becomes extreme, it can lead to low self-regard and negative self-judgment, which are clearly not constructive. With respect to grief or sorrow, in some situations, this emotion is constructive and has a positive effect. But when it becomes something like a habit of mind, grief or sorrow, divorced from any realistic cause, it may be destructive as when it manifests as self-absorbed grief or as depression. Competitiveness too can be constructive, as when our competitive urge motivates us to strive to achieve something better or higher. However, when competitiveness acquires an aspect of wanting to put others down or hold them back so we can outachieve them, it then becomes destructive. In egoism too, we can distinguish between two kinds. A strong sense of self can be constructive, the basis for generating self-confidence, the state of mind that allows us to feel, yes, I can do this. But another form of egoism is evident when, in pursuing our own self-interest, we become totally oblivious to others' welfare and even willing to exploit others to benefit ourselves. This type of egoism is clearly destructive. So when we're dealing with matters as subtle as human mental processes, it is important not to be too dogmatic. I would add, probably not important to be too dogmatic with ourselves as well. I mean, not just with others, but with ourselves. We can be too hard on ourselves. It is difficult or impossible to determine whether or not a given mental state is destructive without knowing its context. Often we can make this determination only by taking into account the underlying motivation, the specific object of the emotion, the consequences of the emotion, and so on. In the area of the human mind, therefore, we should always maintain an attitude of open-mindedness, pragmatism, and flexibility. So I want to see if, open this up for discussion. Does this make sense to everybody? Does everybody see examples in their own life of this dual nature of our emotions that we can, is it clear? Can that be determined? Does anybody have examples that they can share with of any of this? I guess they can get pretty personal.
I have an example.
Yeah.
I was in a relationship for 5 years that was extremely destructive and toxic to my mental, emotional, and physical well-being. And from the toxicity that I was receiving in the relationship, I began to become that toxic within myself. And the fear held me back, began to paralyze me. The anger took over, turned into hate, into rage, and I began to feel the physical symptoms of what was happening within my mind.
What's incredible is that you see that you recognize that. That's amazing, because that's the first step to getting over that and seeing what's happening, that you actually recognize this is what happened to you.
The irony for me, well, thank you. I think the irony of it all for me, what I'm trying to process and understand is prior to finding myself in such a destructive, toxic relationship, I was on my path to enlightenment. I was very strong within myself and very aware and had so much compassion and understanding that I almost became vulnerable in the situation to the toxicity of trying to help another person find their awareness. And then I found myself completely taking steps back in my life and veering off of my path to enlightenment. And so that's a painful journey, especially when you have shame, because if you're trying to help another person, you actually brought yourself down. It's very confusing. I don't want to go too much deeper into it, but that is my example. And I think I agree with you. Awareness is number one. And I'm excited to understand how we move from past the awareness into healing.
Mm-hmm.
Something that you're reminding me of an intense, difficult time I had where people were mostly trying to destroy my effectiveness in my work. It was a work-related thing, and it was like I was literally dealing with sociopaths who were conspiring. Two people were just really doing destructive, horrible things, and it was quite traumatizing. And I was a basket case. It took me a few years, maybe 3 or 4 years, to realize that I understood something about malicious intent and malicious behavior. As a practitioner, I understood something from my personal experience that I previously didn't understand about that kind of maliciousness. And when all's said and done, I feel kind of a weird gratefulness that I went through such a really horrible, difficult time. I had another one many years later with an incredibly obsessive attachment that really taught me just how incredibly powerful and persistent that attachment can be. And like this one is like, I don't know how else I could have had the personal kind of almost a realization of what they're talking about. And it does
Peace
not
be with you. Thank
not
you.
like a sugar coating. It's like, oh shit, this is what we're dealing with here as practitioners. This is how the shit is.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say it can be difficult to reconcile. It's almost like seeing behind the curtain, seeing the reality for what it is, and learning to accept it is what it is, but taking that destructiveness and turning it into something positive that we can grow from, that we can learn from, that we can help others with in the future is kind of where what I believe we can achieve from the experiences, because otherwise, it's all for nothing, and all it does is just make life that much more, that much more suffering. But I think that's the goal here, is to find that awareness, find that enlightenment, and that understanding, and then just the acceptance.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. You're absolutely correct about that. I think probably all of us have had some pretty strong experiences of what we would term suffering. And, in my case, it's only because of the suffering, really, that I have is sort of spurred me on to try and find a solution, an answer. If we didn't have the suffering, and suffering is the first of the noble truths that the Buddha talked about. There is suffering; it exists, and we experience it. But he said there also there's a cause, and this is kind of where we're at with in the Buddhist path. What caused that? What's the cause of suffering? How do I get rid of it? And what you said about then using that experience of the suffering, and same with what Kavita said, is that you can actually, it helps you to inform your relationship with others as you go on, and that you can actually help others because of that experience that you had, because you understand it. You understand the nature of suffering. So in a way, suffering is a necessary part of this evolutionary process that we're all on. And it is part of the the path. It's where we start. Anybody else? Yeah.
Christopher, to your point of evolutionary process, yeah, we are constantly shifting, we're constantly changing, we're constantly evolving. And it's these experiences, which we label positive or negative, that propel us along this evolutionary kind of path. My adopted mother passed away when I was 10. And although that was horrible and very devastating for me, because it was just she and I, having that loss at such a young age really propelled me into looking inward, being reliant for myself, having confidence in my abilities, and was a large component of my development of the person that I am today because of that loss. Had I not had that loss at a young age, then who knows where I could have been, but I wouldn't be the person I am today. I know that.
Right. And, I think we can all relate to that kind of process. In some ways, when, if we have too many positive things happening to us, it can actually slow us down. It can be detrimental. We can get caught up in just, oh, this is great, this is wonderful, and I don't need to do anything else. I mean, Buddhism talks about what they call a realm called the God realm, where these beings who have really, really good karma, they've done things right, and they wind up in this realm which everything is just going great, 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 and so they never even think or consider to do anything to better themselves, and then this good karma just runs out, and then they are thrown back to some kind of lower existence. So there is a very positive way, I think, that we can look at the suffering in our lives and see it as a help, an evolutionary step in a process. And at a certain point, I think we can get smart enough to avoid that suffering and practice in the proper way and be of benefit. Go ahead.
Can you explain, or what's your understanding of how karma and emotion work together?
Well, karma generates the actions that we take repeatedly. They can be good or they can be positive or negative, and it really, again, like His Holiness was saying here, a lot depends on context. So karma is very individual. But if we repeatedly engage, say for instance in anger, and attacking somebody and hating people and having malice towards people, if we repeatedly have done this and it becomes like a habit, it's like the first place we go when we don't like something, that then becomes sort of a propensity in our mind. It becomes a propensity, and that emotion becomes connected to the karma, and it becomes very habitual, and it's gets almost like in a rut. It becomes, we think of it as like, well, this is just who I am. I am this way, I can't change, but we can change. It just takes huge effort. And I think it takes the realization that the consequences of that kind of hatred and malice, or whatever it may be, whatever the destructive emotion may be, hurt us, is going to hold us back. And there's no way that we'll be able to help anybody if we continue with that. I mean, does that address what you were saying?
I was asking,
How are karma and emotions related?
how do they interact?
Yeah. I think they interact very, very closely. Yeah, actually, Venerable Robina Corton, she's an Australian Buddhist nun. She says depression is simply anger turned in against yourself. You know, you're hating yourself. You know, you can no longer blame it on what we try to do. Is we try to project it out and blame somebody. And, you know, I mean, it's so clear. I mean, everybody probably has this experience just on the highway. Somebody cuts you off and you go, oh, that jerk, you know, we're throwing out the blame onto somebody without even knowing what their situation is, without even knowing the context. It's just, I don't like it. So when we get to the point where we no longer can blame others, we turn it in onto ourselves. We start hating ourselves. And that is what depression could become. And it can go way, way, way down into a rut.
Do the winds
Oh, yeah.
play into this?
They definitely play. The winds definitely.
I'm thinking about depression in particular.
The winds follow. I mean, emotions, as we've talked about earlier, emotions are part of a mental process. They're not something that exists apart from the mind. These winds that I talked about at the beginning, the winds, the energy winds that consciousness rides on throughout the entire body. These are, they're very, very, very subtle, but the mind is controlling the winds. So the way they describe it, Geshe Drakpa said, these winds, these energy winds are like a horse, right, that run through our system. And the mind is the rider. The mind directs these winds where they go. So where the mind goes, the winds go. So if the mind has devolved into this self-loathing, self-hatred, deep, dark depression, the winds just completely follow that. The winds are no longer energetic and supporting and are healthy.
You know, the blood rushes to your arms if you're angry.
Mm-hmm.
So I would presume the winds are somehow related to that. You know, the winds
Yes.
are probably not going somewhere else. If you kind of think.
Right.
But with depression, it's maybe that the winds become, you know, the mind's cycle of depression suppresses a healthy movement of the winds.
Absolutely.
Like, in other words, they're underactive. They're
right. They're depressed. The winds are depressed. You know. But they're
I
not energized in the way they would be.
You know how there's upward moving winds and downward moving winds
Mm-hmm.
and voiding winds?
No, yeah.
You ought to get familiar with those. That would be helpful to tie into this. I'd love that if you could address that.
Well, maybe we'll talk more about it in the next when we, you know, talk about the winds for the opening meditation.
And
Go ahead.
I think even the winds at times with depression, it turns even against you. All of that energetic force that could be sent out in a positive way, it turns back against you, and it's almost like walking against the wind. I mean, like walking, yeah.
Wow, that's a great analogy. It really is walking against the wind. You know, when we're depressed like that, when we're and basically it's a kind of self-absorption that is negative, is turning in on yourself. You're absolutely right. There's no way that we can actually extend out and connect and be helpful. And so it's as if the winds are then against you. They're holding you in. They're holding you back. You know.
And not only that, Christopher, when these winds, as was lovely pointed out, are inward and flowing against you, then because they're not flowing and moving as they naturally need to be, your body's building up toxins, your body's building up all this other stuff, which then shifts your entire system to then create dis-ease and then illness physically within.
You know, this is why practices like what Merit does, the yoga practices, and Merit works with these energies and these winds all the time. And you can feel them begin to flow as you're doing these practices. They're very, very helpful. They're very helpful for getting those winds balanced and moving in the right direction, I think.
Christopher,
Yeah.
I was, just when you said that, I was scribbling down these notes of when you were saying how the mind directs the winds. In a yoga practice, you're directing your mind. In yoga, one of the classic sayings is your mind goes where your energy flows. So when you take it back to the sensations in your body, you're taking it out of riding the habitual emotional, whatever emotional things that your habits are, and you're coming back into the body where you're going back into present tense, free from emotion. And like you're saying, Tracy, it can flow freely. So it very much is a health practice, but it's so connected to this. I just love it.
Yeah, thank you for that, because that is so true what you just said, and I've experienced that when we do yoga. I've done yoga with you.
Yeah,
You experience that happening, where just the move, what you're talking about, the getting in touch with the body and the winds can sort of move things out and move things that are blocking you. It can change it, shift it.
yeah.
You had a little voice of the Dalai Lama one time.
Oh yeah, that's true. Oh wow. Yeah, there was one. When I first started practicing Buddhism, it was with Geshe Drakpa. I had several really vivid dreams that involved the Dalai Lama. And I remember one dream, just the Dalai Lama's face just appeared before me, and he said, "When afflictive emotions arise, apply the breaths." And what he's referring to is applying the use of the breath and the wind to those breaths that we did at the beginning.
Yeah.
Those breaths, apply those, because they will neutralize, any afflictive emotion that you have, and it will get you back to a balanced state. Same thing yoga does, or it's very similar, or like I said, qigong or something like that. It's a similar thing. We don't necessarily in the Western civilization, we don't talk about, medicine doesn't talk so much about these energy winds, but they're certainly in the Eastern civilizations for centuries they've been talking about them. And when you begin to work with them, you can feel them. It's no denying that they exist.
So like already you covered a useful tool. You didn't mention that it's 9 breaths, but the cycle of 9 breaths
Right.
is what His Holiness was talking about.
Right. The series of breaths that we did at the beginning, in through the left, down, around, out through the right. You do that 3 times. Then in through the right, down to the base of the spine, out through the left. You do that 3 times. And then the third round, in through both nostrils, down to the base of the spine, up through the central channel 3 times. So that's nine breaths. And you do these round of 9 breaths. And you can do this simply to neutralize the mind. What I was doing in the opening visualization, when we were visualizing the Buddha and taking in the energy of the Buddha and releasing our negative energy, was a kind of a Tonglen practice in reverse. So the Buddha was doing Tonglen with us, taking our negative propensities, and we were taking in his positive propensities. But this is something that we ourselves can do, and it is a practice that Buddhists do, to take on the suffering of others. But what we do when we take on that black smoke of others is we use it to destroy our ego self-grasping. We use it as a method to destroy this self-cherishing, and then we release out this positive energy to others. So I was just sort of doing it in reverse to see if we could sort of feel that energy coming from an enlightened being and getting rid of our negative energy. But just in simply doing those breaths without any intention at all, really, except to neutralize yourself, they will work to just bring you to a neutral state of mind. Okay, let's move on a little bit. Okay, shared features of destructive emotions. One feature that characterizes all destructive emotions is a tendency to distort our perception of reality. They cause us to narrow our perspective so that we fail to see a given situation in its wider context. For example, when we are feeling an extreme form of attachment, such as intense desire, lust, or greed, often we are projecting a level of attractiveness onto the object of our desire, which far exceeds what is really there. We become blind even to quite obvious shortcomings, and in our obsessive clinging, we create a kind of insecurity in ourselves, a feeling that we need to obtain the object of our desire and are incomplete without it. Excessive attachment tends also to involve a desire to control, which can be very suffocating when the object of that desire happens to be another person. This happens in relationships a lot. Because of this, extreme attachment is by nature quite unstable. One moment we may feel great affection for something or someone, but when, for example, our desire for control is thwarted, this feeling can easily turn to resentment or hatred. Just think of all of the divorces. Well, those marriages start out where there's a very, very strong attraction. There's a lot of projection going on with, the couple, and then, they're together for, 6 months or so, and it's not what they thought it was. And then that turns into anger and disappointment and frustration. And unless they work it out, it just can end in the relationship splitting up. A similar loss of perspective characterizes extreme or intense emotions of aversion, such as anger, hatred, contempt, or resentment. When we are gripped by intense anger, for example, the object of our rage will always appear 100% negative, even though in moments of calm, we may recognize that the same person or thing has many admirable qualities. The overly strong emotion causes us to lose our capacity for discernment. We cannot see the long and short-term consequences of our action. And as a result, we are unable to distinguish between right and wrong. We literally, for a moment, become almost mad, incapable of acting in our own best interest. And then after the event, when the emotion cools, how often we regret what we have done or said in anger. Let's check the time. We're at 12:25. Okay, we're good. So that's interesting. The word, when we say we get mad, well, literally, if you think back at some situation recently where you were angry, I can think back at a situation this just occurred with me a couple of months ago, and I don't know what, the frustration that had been building up internally in me about a particular situation was triggered by somebody who was actually quite close to me. And it is almost as if I just went blind. I went lost my all sense of logic and reason. It was like I went mad because it just triggered this reaction, which I just burst out. And of course, quickly it settled, and I apologized and said, I really am not angry with you. It's the situation. But that was the feeling I had, as if I had just lost control, and I just made a really strong mental note of that. Because for somebody, who's practicing, thinking that they're working on those things, it's very eye-opening to see that occur, to see that happen to you, and to see that, wow, I was not being attentive enough. I was not paying attention to what was going on, and this just happened. So these things are, if you use these experiences properly, they can help you the next time. They can help you not be as angry the next time. It's a slow process. It is very humbling. Oh, yeah. And that's actually a good thing. It's a good thing. Okay, now, okay, this is good. This is the last bit that we're going to read from, and then we'll do some meditation based on this. The emotion families. One helpful approach to understanding our destructive emotions is to view them as related families distinguished by the kind of underlying state of mind they involve. For example, as I've said, the emotions of the anger family, such as hatred, enmity, and malice, are characterized by an exaggerated repulsion, while those of the attachment family, such as greed, lust, and craving, are characterized by an equally exaggerated sense of attraction. The other main families of afflictive emotions, envy, pride, and doubt, involve mixtures of excessive attraction on the one hand, such as the excessive attachment to a deluded self-image in the case of pride, and excessive repulsion on the other, such as the excessive sense of enmity towards a rival, as in the case of envy. As we have already seen, in addition to this element of excessive revulsion or attraction, or unhealthy mixtures of the two, all afflictive emotions are further characterized by an unrealistic or deluded perspective. Envy is a somewhat complex family of afflictions, since its root lies in attachment and attraction, yet it also has a strong element of anger, hostility, and repulsion. Recent scientific research on happiness has found that one of the primary sources of discontent in today's world, especially in the more affluent societies, is our human tendency to compare ourselves to those around us. Fundamentally, this comes down to the problem of envy. The afflictive family of pride or conceit, which includes destructive attitudes such as arrogance, prejudice, and even obsessive or unrealistic embarrassment, also involves a mixture of attraction and repulsion. Attraction, for example, to an unrealistic or deluded self-image, and repulsion or disdain toward anyone or anything that threatens that cherished self-image. This attachment to an inflated self-image, whether based on social status, accomplishment, or the circumstances of our birth, may prompt us to actions that are disrespectful of others, and such actions are destructive both to the welfare of others and to ourselves. Finally, there is the family of afflictive doubt, which encompasses such destructive emotions as anxiety and obsessive guilt. These are grounded in habitual fear and in unrealistic self-loathing, which are very damaging to our ability to be compassionate. Emotions of the afflictive doubt family can therefore be highly detrimental to our own sense of well-being. These then are the destructive emotions which I consider the main obstacles to human well-being, not only our own individual well-being, but also that of those around us, and ultimately that of the very world we share. These emotions fundamentally undermine our capacity to put positive ethical values such as compassion into practice. Only when we fully recognize the negative repercussions of such destructive emotions and expose their futility and impracticality as responses will we be able to go about tackling them effectively. Our inner development with regard to regulating our destructive emotions calls for a two-pronged approach. On the one hand, we must seek to reduce the impact of the destructive potentials that are inherent within us. On the other, we must seek to enhance the positive qualities that also naturally exist within us. This two-pronged approach to mental training is what I consider to be the heart of genuine spiritual practice. And so the next session, we will go into that, the two-pronged approach and how to deal with those destructive emotions. So what I would like to do, well, if there's any more discussion about this, we can, I mean, I'm certainly open to anything that has come up for anybody and discussion about this.
Sure. I have a question for you, going way back to that hand exercise when we were looking at our hand. So discernment, am I correct to say that if I looked at my hand and I recognized it as my hand, as opposed to, say, your hand, like if we stick our hands out and I was like, oh, clearly that is my hand, not his, that would be discernment.
Absolutely, yes.
If I were to look at my fingernails and I had some kind of judgment about them, like, my fingernails are getting really long, that would be discernment. And if I thought then, I should cut my fingernails because they're getting too long, would that also be discernment?
That would be feeling, because what you've done is you've seen that your fingernails are too long. That's simply discernment. You can see that it's too long. But then there comes a sense which says, well, that's not a good thing. There's a feeling. I need to do something. I need to change that. There's something about that you don't find that attractive. You find that to be a problem. So yes, discernment's involved. You've discerned that they are long, but you've had a feeling that this is not a good thing. Some people would go, the longer the better, I mean, I want them to go so long that they curl around, I mean, it just depends on you and the context and so it's your feeling. That is feeling mixed with discernment. It really, yeah.
Because I don't like my fingernails to get too long. I play the piano, they clink. I don't like that. But yeah, but you're right. Some people want them longer. But then what if I thought to myself, tonight, I am going to cut my fingernails. Like I've made a decision I am making a plan, what would that be?
That would be volition. You have an intention, and you're putting your mind in an intention and a direction. That's volition. Your mind is saying, I'm going to do this. I intend to do this. I mean, there's no action that we take, that doesn't include all of these. You can't even get up to walk across the room without the volition being the first thing. I intend to get up and walk across the room, you know?
So when you make a decision about something, what is that? The decision itself, like before you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to cut, like I'm not sure what to do. Should I cut my fingernails? Should I not cut my fingernails? I'm going to cut my fingernails. So like that one, the making of a decision, you're saying that's volition?
Yeah, you have an intention. You haven't actually done it. You have the intention. So volition is an intention. It's a movement of the mind toward a particular thing.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Because I've been reading this book by the Dalai Lama about understanding emptiness, and I understand things logically, but you know, when I envision what my self is, what often comes to me is the part of me that understands or the part of me that makes a decision. You know, so this helps. Now it's like, okay, when I'm making a decision, that is, you know, whatever mental consciousness.
It's a mental factor. There's a mental factor. Like I said, there are 5 omnipresent. With every action we take, there are 5 omnipresent mental factors. And then, you know, and dealing with the main mind. So when you're talking about making a decision, you're talking about your mental consciousness. That's the main mind you're dealing with. You know, when you're actually cutting your nails, there's a whole bunch of things going on. You know, you're actually, you know, you're working with all your various sense consciousnesses and your mental consciousness. But when you make this decision to do something in the future, that's your mental consciousness. That's the main mind, and then the main mind has those mental factors in it. It's, you know, at first it's confusing, but when you take examples like the hand and you follow through with it, you can see how that works. And the more you become familiar with that, you could take anything and do that with it. You could follow anything, and you can see those five things happening. The more you become familiar with that, the more you can actually begin to track what it is you're doing, what's going on, and you can just not allow the feeling to just seem as if it came out of nowhere, or when like I got really angry and went mad for a couple of minutes. You know, I wasn't tracking what was going on, you know, and it just seemed like it popped out of nowhere. So these things, these ways that Buddhism views the mind and its functions are extremely helpful. You know?
That is really helpful to me understanding, you know, self and emptiness. Because usually when I envision Roxanne, it's like this little person up there going like, I've decided to do this, you know. And so now that really helps me understand, no, that's one of the factors in the mental consciousness that makes that decision, not like Roxanne hovering up there.
Yeah, this idea of the self is really it's this sense of just me, and it's hard to get this across, and but the self is not the same as the body. It's not the same as your name. It's not the same. So one way to see how the self works is that we'll go, when we're talking about me, we'll say my mind, my body, my fingers. The fingers, the body, the mind, they're not the self. It's that part of us that says me, mine. It's a mental construct, the self, me. It actually doesn't exist independently in and of itself. This is why to actually pierce this view of emptiness can be so difficult, because we are so habituated to not seeing things that way. So, I mean, Buddhism requires that you study this wisdom branch, which is you know, emptiness and wisdom and meditation. It also requires that you study what's going on with your emotions, with how this works with your emotions, and to counter these negative emotions. So it's a two-pronged, like he said, it's two-pronged. You have to work with both of these. He's not talking so much about emptiness and wisdom in this, but it definitely comes up, you know. So I want to go now to a meditation practice. what the Dalai Lama recommends, and all of the teachers actually recommend after a session where you are reading or studying or like doing what we're just discussing, to then actually do a meditation, a focus on what we've been talking about. So I think what we can talk about or do a meditation here on is the effects of anger. Let's just take anger as a mental state. So there are three aspects to this, and before we do that, what the Dalai Lama and all of the teachers recommend is that we do a breathing. This is simple meditation to focus the mind. It's just about focusing and concentrating and reeling the mind in, so that when you then go to do this analytical meditation on anger, your mind will have been focused. So all we're going to do here is a breathing exercise, and it's just breathe in through your nostrils and out through your nostrils. And bring your attention to the breath itself, right as it goes into the nostrils and as it goes out. And you don't want to lose your focus or concentration on that. You don't want to let your mind slip and wander off and start thinking about what you need to do in 15 minutes or what happened yesterday. You have to keep bringing your mind back to focus on this very simple thing, which is the movement of your breath in and out of your nostrils. Venerable Rabina says, think of it like you're walking across the edge of a cliff and you are holding an infant in your arms, and you cannot allow yourself to lose your concentration so that you fall off the cliff and lose the baby. So she says you have to have that kind of attention to what you're doing, like you cannot let that go. So just for a minute or two, see if we can do this. Just keep that attention completely focused on the in and out of the breath at your nostrils. If you wander off, just bring it back. Okay, that's probably enough. As you can probably see from that experience, it's not so easy to do. And it is important though, because what we're trying to do is to train our mind to focus. And it shows us how scattered our mind is, how easily it's just drawn here and there. We have to just train our mind to focus. Hi, Patricia, good morning.
Good morning. What did you say? Oh.
I didn't say ooh.
Oh.
Yeah.
Must have come from my head.
It must have come from your head, yeah.
Excuse me.
Well, no, your head's good.
That's my mother. Okay, so now that we've sort of got the idea of focusing our mind, now we're going to think about anger, and this will be in three phases. Okay, so first, and basically, I should talk a little bit about the posture. What you want to do is have your spine as straight as you can have it. Sometimes they'll say, think of it almost like your spine is a stack of coins, stacked up all the way, up your neck, and you don't want those coins to tip over. So you have a very, very straight spine. Your head can be slightly tilted down, a little, just a little tilted down. You can have your hands, if you're sitting cross-legged, you could either have your hands on your knees. If you're sitting in a chair, you can have your hands on your knees, or you can have your hands, I don't know if you can see this. You can have your hands one on the other with the thumbs touching. So you have your right hand is resting in your left hand with the thumbs touching. And that is kind of one of the mudras. And you can hold it there just at the, just under your navel as you're sitting there. And then you breathe naturally. You can sort of have your gaze facing down, sort of downward, looking at the space in front of you. Or if it's more comfortable for you, you can have your eyes closed. So first, reflect on the way anger immediately disrupts your mental composure. So think back to a time when you were angry. And how it immediately disrupted your mental composure. It creates a negative mood and spoils the atmosphere around you. Consider too that in the heat of anger, you have a tendency to say harsh things, even to those you care for deeply. And that in general, it negatively affects your interactions with others. This contemplation on the destructive nature of anger needs to be sufficiently deep that over time, your basic stance toward anger becomes one of caution and vigilance. Once you're convinced of the destructive nature of anger, then move on to the next stage of this meditation. This involves a developing of a greater awareness of the mental state of anger itself, particularly at its onset. By becoming familiar with the way you feel when anger arises, how it feels physically in your body, how it feels subjectively or psychologically, you can learn to recognize anger before it starts to wreak its havoc. And this is something you would know yourself. Could be that the heartbeat races. You may feel flushed. There will be a physical feeling that precedes an outburst of anger. The more accurately you are able to identify the specific characteristics associated with the arising of anger, the greater your chance to bring mindful awareness into the process and thus intervene early in the chain of causation. The third stage of this mental cultivation practice for dealing with anger is to apply the relevant antidote to it. For example, for anger, the antidote is patience and forbearance. And I'm going to read to you what the Dalai Lama says about this. What patience or tolerance or forbearance and even forgiveness, what it really means in the context of Buddhism, is the ability to endure suffering. It entails not giving in to our instinctive urge to respond negatively to our difficulties. But it has nothing to do with being either passive or impotent. It's not a case of tolerating something just because you don't have the ability to hit back. Nor is it enduring injustice grudgingly through gritted teeth. Instead, genuine patience requires great strength. It is fundamentally the exercise of restraint based on mental discipline. There are three aspects of patience or forbearance to consider. Forbearance toward those who harm us, acceptance of suffering, especially when there's nothing that we can do about it, and acceptance of reality. So just to recap, think about the destructive nature of anger. Think about how you start to feel before anger arises, physically, mentally. And then think about the antidote: patience, forbearance, restraint. And take a firm stance that next time anger arises, you will remember this. You will remember how destructive it can be. You will remember the signs, the early signs, the warning signs of anger arising. And you will take a firm stance to restrain from allowing that anger to be destructive in that situation. And that's the close of that short meditation. So now what I want to do is just to close this all out is to say a very short dedication prayer that by any positive potential that we together have developed because of this conversation we've been having in this meeting together, any positive potential or merit that we have developed, may we dedicate that positive potential to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. That all sentient beings everywhere can find this path or find the path that will lead them to happiness and liberation and complete enlightenment. We dedicate that positive potential, and even the smallest positive potential that we have created today. And then from a Buddhist standpoint, a dedication is in all my rebirths, never separated from perfect spiritual teachers, may I enjoy the magnificent Dharma of the Buddha. By completing all the qualities of the stages and pathways of consciousness to enlightenment, may I attain the state of enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And then the final is a chant in Tibetan, and it basically is saying, may the precious mind that has the intention to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, they call that bodhicitta, but they call it the Bodhi mind. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. And may that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. And then a second dedication or intention is, may the true view of reality, the view of emptiness, the view that nothing exists independently, separately. Everything is a dependent arising and is empty of existing independently. May that view that's not been born in my mind arise and grow. May that view that has been born in my mind, may it continue to grow forevermore. And this is how it goes in Tibetan. Jang chuk sem chok rim po che ma kye panam kye gyu chi kye panyam pa me pa yang gong ne gong du per war shuk tong ye tawa rim po che ma kye panam kye gyu chi kye panyam pa me pa yam gong ne gong du per wa shu. Thank you, everybody. It's great seeing you.
Thanks, Christopher.
Oh, if the weather
Thank
is
you.
good, if the weather is good, the next week, what we're going to be doing on Saturdays is just sort of like for our Buddhist friends, it's kind of open. Come, you can swim in the pool, bring your bathing suit, you can bring a lunch. I mean, if it's a nice day, you just can come and hang out after class. Okay, just open invitation to you all. Okay,
Sounds
thank you very much.
Bye.
See you.
Next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Paul.
Christopher, thank you.
Bye. Thank you, guys. Great seeing you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.